She slept in a car on the way to her dreams. The untold story of Hilary Swank. She stood on one of the most famous stages in the world and held her second Academy Award. She thanked her husband. She called him her everything. 1 year later, the marriage was over. But that was only the beginning of what was falling apart. The films that followed her greatest victories lost millions of dollars. Her body was quietly fighting something she refused to let the public see. And the industry that had celebrated her with not one, but two of its highest honors could not figure out what to do with her anymore. The woman who had seemed untouchable was unraveling in ways that none of the headlines fully captured. And the real story, the one that starts not in Hollywood but in a trailer park, then a broken down car, then a public restroom where a teenage girl tried to look presentable for an audition she desperately needed, is far more extraordinary than any of the awards or the scandals that came after them. To understand Hilary Swank, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning that gets mentioned in the highlight reels, but the real beginning. The one with the trailer park near a lake in the Pacific Northwest, where a little girl learned before she even started school that the world has a way of deciding your worth based on things you have absolutely no control over. She was 6 years old when her family settled into that small community, and she was barely 7 when she understood what living there meant to the people outside of it. When parents at her school learned where she lived, invitations stopped arriving. Friends disappeared. Playdates that had seemed normal and easy simply vanished. Nobody explained it to her directly. They didn't need to. Children understand the social mechanics of exclusion long before they have the vocabulary for it. She learned it in the gap between being included and being suddenly permanently left out. She watched classmates go to birthday parties and after-school gatherings while she stayed behind, pretending not to notice and not to care. She was not yet 8 years old. The loneliness that settled into her during those years was not the ordinary loneliness of childhood. It was specific and purposeful. The kind that tells you something is fundamentally wrong with you, even when the thing that is actually wrong is the cruelty of the people doing the excluding. That lesson, absorbed so young, about the way society draws invisible lines around people based on where they sleep and what their parents earn, never fully left her. It made her more alert to those lines than most people ever become. And it pushed her inward, toward the only things that never made her feel like she was on the wrong side of anything. Books welcomed her. Movies welcomed her. Stories about characters who fought through pain and came out the other side were not just entertainment. They were evidence that survival was possible, that circumstances were not destiny, that the version of yourself you imagined could eventually become the version of yourself you actually lived. She lost herself in those stories with the particular intensity of a child who genuinely needs them. They were not a hobby. They were a lifeline. At home, things were not calm either. Her parents were in a constant battle against financial pressure that never eased, and the tension that builds in a household where money is always short and the bills never stop had its own inevitable end. By the time Hilary was 15, the marriage had collapsed. And the decision that followed, made by a mother and daughter with almost nothing, was one of the most quietly courageous things two people can do. They left. With $75 between them and a single gas station credit card, they packed everything they had into a car and drove from Washington State to California. They had no one waiting for them, no contacts, no safety net. They had each other in a dream, and they drove toward it because staying meant letting go of the only thing that felt worth fighting for. That car became their home. For weeks, they slept in it. At rest stops, on quiet streets, wherever they could find a place to park without drawing attention. Some nights were frightening. Some had a strange quality of freedom to them. The freedom of people who have already given up the comfortable illusion of security and decided to gamble everything on something real. They washed up in public restrooms. They borrowed clothes for auditions. They showed up anyway. Hilary was 15 years old, trying not to look like someone who had slept in a car the night before, auditioning in a city that had not asked for her and had no particular reason to welcome her. And she kept going. Because the alternative, turning back, giving up, accepting that the trailer park and the exclusion and the financial struggle were the whole story, was simply not something she could make herself do. After a month, things shifted slightly. Her mother found a secretarial job. They rented a single room from a woman in Burbank. That room, one small room shared, modest, nowhere near comfortable, felt like a profound victory. It gave them a base. And from that base, Hilary started booking small television roles. They paid little. They did not make her famous. But each one was evidence that progress was possible, that the drive from Washington had not been a mistake, that something was moving in the right direction even if it was moving slowly. She auditioned constantly. She got rejected constantly. She watched roles go to actors who already had names, who already had momentum, who already had the machinery of the industry working in their favor. She took uncredited parts and background work and anything else that kept her close to the world she was trying to break into. She understood quickly that survival in Hollywood required the specific skill of treating small wins as significant ones, of holding tightly to whatever progress existed, rather than fixating on how far there was still to go. Her early credits accumulated without breaking through. A minor part in a vampire film that performed modestly at the box office and was largely forgotten by critics. Small recurring appearances in popular television series that gave her experience without recognition. A lead role in a franchise sequel that, despite every ingredient suggesting it could succeed, failed badly with audiences, becoming the lowest performing entry in its entire series. She later said that experience taught her to be more deliberate about the project she chose, to look for stories that meant something to her rather than just jobs that paid the bills. The late 1990s brought what looked, briefly, like the stability she had been chasing. A major primetime television series offered her a recurring role with a promise of 2 years. That promise. For a young actress who had been living project to project, rejection to rejection since she was 15, felt like solid ground under her feet for the first time. She built herself into the character. She showed up. She worked. And after 16 episodes, the character was quietly written out of the story and shipped off to another state with barely an explanation, as if she had never been there at all. The moment hit her harder than she expected. She later described feeling heartbroken, genuinely questioning whether she belonged in the industry at all. The specific cruelty of it was that the show was no longer even doing well. Ratings were declining across the board. And she was still the one who got cut, which made the rejection feel like a verdict on her talent rather than a consequence of storytelling decisions. She was close to walking away. She thought seriously about what it would mean to simply stop, to admit that maybe the drive from Washington, the weeks in the car, the years of rejection, maybe all of it had pointed toward a door that was never going to fully open. If this journey is moving you, the image of a teenager in a borrowed outfit trying not to show how tired she is while she waits for one more audition is connecting with something real in you. Please share this story. Because what comes next is proof that the moments when we are most certain everything is over are sometimes the moments that change everything. 2 months after losing the television role. 2 months after coming as close as she ever had to giving up entirely. She landed an audition for a small independent film about a real person whose story had never been told on screen before. The role was nothing like anything she had attempted. It required total transformation. Not just physical, though that would come, but psychological. It required her to inhabit a life, a perspective, a way of moving through the world that was entirely unlike her own. The director saw something in her audition that convinced her this was the right person for the job. And Hilary, who had spent years auditioning for safe projects and commercial franchises, said yes to something that felt genuinely dangerous. The preparation was unlike anything she had experienced. Her long blonde hair was cut off and colored. She bound her chest every day. She lost weight deliberately. She spent weeks living as the character in public. Not just studying the mannerisms, but inhabiting them until they stopped feeling performed and started feeling inhabited. She ate differently. She moved differently. She stopped being recognizable as herself, even to people who knew her well. The transformation was total in a way that only happens when a performer is not just technically skilled, but genuinely willing to disappear. Boys Don't Cry was not a commercial blockbuster. It was a small film with a modest budget and a limited release that found its audience slowly and then couldn't be ignored. Critics responded with the kind of language that gets used when something genuinely special has been made. And when award season arrived, Hilary Swank's name was everywhere. Eventually including on the envelope that was opened at the biggest ceremony in American film, where she received her first Academy Award. For a girl who had slept in a car on the streets of Los Angeles at 15, it was a moment that should have felt like the end of a very long, very hard road. It felt more like the beginning. What followed was a career trajectory that most actors can only imagine. Roles that let her demonstrate extraordinary range, a second Academy Award a few years later for a performance that devastated audiences and stayed with viewers long after they left the theater. 2 statues. Recognition from the industry she had fought to enter for over a decade. And at the ceremony where she received that second award, she thanked her husband and called him her everything in front of the entire world. 12 months later, the marriage was over. The divorce was only the most visible of the things that began to come apart in the years that followed. The films she made after her peak critical success struggled commercially. Projects that seemed well-suited to her abilities did not find the audiences that her earlier work had. The industry, which tends to treat even its most decorated performers as commercial propositions first, grew uncertain about how to use her. And underneath all of it, Her body was fighting a battle that she kept hidden from almost everyone around her, a physical struggle that would eventually demand to be acknowledged no matter how determined she was to push through it. What Hilary Swank's story ultimately says, when you trace it from the trailer park to the car to the single rented room to the stage where she stood holding two of the most coveted awards her industry gives, is something that does not fit neatly into a motivational poster. It is not simply a story about perseverance paying off. It is a story about the cost of perseverance, about what it takes out of you to keep going when every reasonable assessment of your situation suggests stopping is the smarter choice. About what it means to build your entire identity around the belief that your circumstances are not your destiny, and then to discover that even when you prove it, even when you get the statues and the recognition and the validation, the world keeps moving and the challenges keep coming and the work is never actually finished. She said many times across many years of interviews that the nights in the car shaped her in ways that success could never undo. That knowing what it feels like to have nothing. To be genuinely uncertain about where you will sleep or what you will eat or whether anyone will ever open a door for you. Gave her a relationship to gratitude that people who grew up in comfort rarely develop. She understood the value of a warm room, a steady paycheck, a phone call that said yes instead of no in a way that ran much deeper than appreciation. It was structural. It was built into how she saw everything. The girl who was excluded from birthday parties because of where she lived grew up to stand on stages that the entire world watched. The teenager who borrowed clothes for auditions in a city that had not invited her grew up to be someone that city could not ignore. The person who almost quit, who sat with the genuine weight of maybe I should just stop, said yes to one more audition, and that yes changed the entire direction of her life. That is not a simple story. It is not a clean story. It is difficult chapters and real losses in a body that carries the evidence of years spent pushing past limits that probably should have been respected. But it is a story about what is possible when a person decides, at the deepest level, that their circumstances do not define them. When they hold on to that decision through the trailer park and the car and the rejection and the doubt and the near surrender and the unexpected door that opens just when they were closest to giving up. If Hilary Swank's story connected with something in you, if any part of it reminded you of your own long road or someone you love who is still in the middle of theirs, please like this video and share it. Subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. The most powerful lives are the ones built from the most difficult beginnings, and they deserve to be told.